Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 201 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. I'm down here in the bunker, Parnassus, Vomitorium Central, as always, with my good friend and excellent co-host, Dr. David C. Noe. Dave, how you feeling?
I'm doing pretty well. The C doesn't stand for anything, and neither does the T.
No, nothing at all.
We're going to let it go.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Did you know my brother-in-law,
yes,
his middle name is D, and that's it. It stands for nothing.
Really?
Yes. Isn't that interesting?
Your brother-in-law, the middle initial is just a D.
It's just D.
That's really interesting.
Right. He said that it's caused a lot of problems in his life, though, because every time you have to do something official,
right,
they ask, we need your full middle name, and you just explain it's just the letter.
I know
thanks, Mom and Dad.
I know someone who has a theory that the middle initial J is the most powerful middle initial.
In what
Edgar
sense?
J. Hoover.
Oh, I see.
Donald J. Trump.
It's got a punch to it?
Somehow.
Yeah.
I'm not saying these are worthy men. I'm just saying that somehow it grabs the imagination.
Yeah.
If you have J, right? I guess John F. Kennedy is an exception, but certain initials you want in the middle, right?
Yes.
Others you don't.
You don't. Right. I've also heard that if you have the same amount of syllables in your first name as your last name, that also has a punch. Like Marlon Brando or
Marlon Brando.
Tom Cruise.
I see.
Right.
Jeffrey Winkle. Okay.
David Noe. So we both got it.
Nice.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Now, there was a listener who said, I want more banter.
Yeah. Oh, there was one?
Don't you remember? On episode 200, he said, give me 45 minutes of just banter and brackish tang.
Right. So are we going there? Or?
No.
Okay.
All right. So today, Jeff, what are we talking about? I mean, you're doing well.
I'm doing just fine.
Autumnal.
It's autumnal, right? So,
we're about to shift from pumpkin spice to peppermint.
Yeah.
That's the chart.
Yeah, we're in that kind of liminal space right now.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And your challenge for November, not no shave or anything like that, but just I'm going to make it through.
I'm going to make it through. I'm going to avoid everything with pumpkin spice or peppermint.
Okay.
That's my goal.
You're not into the ginger snap smell and so forth?
No, just give it to me.
Okay.
Black coffee. That's
all right.
Yeah. But today, Dave,
yes,
we are going to begin tackling this really interesting book that is titled Redating Matthew, Mark, and Luke, a Fresh Assault on the Synoptic Problem by one John Wenham.
Yes.
And this comes from 1991.
Yes, this is fascinating to me. Someone tipped me off to this book, and I dove into it. I used my local university library to read through it. And after reading through it and enjoying it so much, I bought my own copy because it's one that I want to reference.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Synoptic Problem.
Yes.
And let's begin with the very first point, right?
Yeah.
Why are these three Gospels called the Synoptic Gospels?
Well, because they all apparently they have a lot of shared material.
Correct.
And so the idea is that in some fashion, they are either reliant on this mysterious kind of outside document we call Q,
right,
or they are interrelated. They are paraphrasing and quoting from each other.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So the word synoptic, we have to go a little pedantic here and etymological, as is our wont, or mine at least. And that is horao, the Greek verb means to look, the second principal part, opsomai, the third, apon, right? So synoptic means to look at something together.
Yes.
So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, unlike the Gospel of John, written quite a bit later probably, they look at the same material but from different perspectives.
Right.
That's the Synoptic Gospel. And before we get into the meat of it, we have a shout out.
We do. Yes.
You want to get us started on this one?
I'll get us started. This comes from one Reverend Chris Coleman, who is from the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So he writes, he says, I live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest of the United States, specifically Vancouver, Washington, not Vancouver, British Columbia. He seems very...
I think he has to do that a lot, probably.
Probably. Exactly. That's confusing. Right? Vancouver is just north of Portland, Oregon, home of Ratio Coffee, he mentions, across the Columbia River. Says, I serve as a pastor of a Reformed church. When I am not focused on next week's sermon or caring for the souls of our members, I am spending time with my wife, 3 children, and our French bulldog.
I wonder if that bulldog has read Mahru.
I'm sure of it.
Of course. Continue, please.
Yes. You can usually find us hiking, camping, or running around to a youth theater arts program our children participate in. My wife, Melissa, and I are also licensed foster parents.
Wow.
He's a busy guy.
Busy guy.
Yeah.
Busy.
Carry it on there, would you?
Sure. So Chris says, I was introduced to Ad Nauseam by Dr. Noe during a class on Theodore Beza at Westminster Seminary, California in January of 2024. I was reminded again of the podcast by a mutual friend, Kara Bergeron.
Now, hang on a second. So were you out in California?
Yeah, don't you remember?
You travel a lot, so I have a hard time kind of keeping track of you.
I give you laminated copies of my itinerary the first of every week.
And they all go on the fridge.
Really?
But I'm forgetting about this trip.
And your kids say, I want some eggs. Who's this guy? Where's he going?
Right, exactly.
Right. So he says, she recommended that I listen to your recent discussion of the Philistines and their connection to the Mycenaeans.
Oh, yeah.
I have been it was Giving Goliath His Due,
right.
Parts 1 and 2 by Professor Bierling.
Yeah.
He says, I have been preaching through the book of Joshua, and there are some interesting connections between the Anakim, Joshua 11, and Goliath. I have become increasingly interested in the classical world, and I find your discussions on the history and mythology very interesting, helpful, and oftentimes humorous.
Not always, just oftentimes. Right.
He's not so much into the quirk as others, perhaps.
Right.
And he says, I am also working through Moss Method for Greek.
Fantastic.
Chris is a great student, by the way.
Right. So this is someone that you remember from your time
out
west?
West?
Okay,
yeah.
Yep.
Fine individual. Thank you so much, Reverend Coleman, for listening to our little show.
Yes.
Thank you for sending in the shout out. Thank you for keeping the flame lit of the classics out there.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks from myself as well. And we usually say this towards the end, but just a reminder to all our other listeners, if you want a shout out, if you want to be praised effusively, like we just did for Reverend Coleman.
Or roasted a little bit.
Just mildly.
Okay.
Drop us a note. Don't hesitate. Dave, we got an opening quote here.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could drop that on us.
Sure. So this is from one Richard Claverhouse Jebb, known to his friends as Jebb. And it's from the work called Homer, An Introduction to the Iliad and the Odyssey, 3rd edition, London, 1888. Now, someone might be saying, what does Homer have to do with the Gospels? Well, here it goes. Says Jebb on page 94, the question, who was Homer, is one of the two great literary problems of the day, the other being the synoptic problem of the Gospels. So if you take all of the literary questions, that is in the West, anyone who studies the literature of the Western world, these are the two most pressing questions. Who was Homer, and what's the relationship between Matthew, Mark, and Luke?
Right.
And as we'll see, the relationship between those three Gospels is unbelievably complicated.
It really is complex, yeah. I mean, I thought going into this topic, I thought I knew a little bit about this, but kind of looking under the hood, it's mind-bending.
It really is.
How complicated this is. Yep.
So this book by Wenham, right, it's only a couple hundred pages. It's getting, with the notes, it gets almost up to 300. We're going to try to cover half of it in this episode, and the next half in the second episode. The book is dense, it's rich, and has some wonderful diagrams as well. It reads almost like a math book in places.
Yeah.
But before we turn to the meat of it, maybe we should introduce the listeners to who John Wenham was.
Sure. Yes. So this is a gentleman who was born in 1913. He died not long after he published this book, 1996.
Yep.
He was a conservative Anglican biblical scholar and devoted his professional life to academic and pastoral work. What else was he up to?
Well, he held a number of important academic positions, including vice principal of Tyndale Hall, Bristol, and lecturer in New Testament Greek at Bristol University, and the warden of Latimer House, Oxford. So if you have an English background, right, and you're at some of these leading universities like Bristol and Oxford and so forth, then when you make more conservative theological statements, as he's going to make in this book, I think it comes with a little more credibility. So if you're a pastor like myself or Chris or someone else, and you say the same things, they may be just as true, but if you back it up with degrees from Oxford and positions at Bristol and so forth, you're going to get a little more credibility with the average listener, the average reader.
Indeed, right. So he is also known for his defense of biblical inerrancy and for his work on the New Testament, of which maybe this was his last major published work.
Yeah, I think so. Yep. Yeah. Elements of New Testament Greek was one of them, Christ and the Bible, and the third one, the Easter Enigma. So, Jeff, we have to talk about the Q source.
Yes, we do.
Right?
Yep.
And the Markan priority theory. And thankfully, we're going to do that a little bit before turning to the introduction of Wenham, which is entitled A Radical Thesis. So the Q in New Testament studies, Q document hypothesis, stands for Quelle, a German word that means source. So one of the ways to explain the tremendous similarity between the three Gospels is to hypothesize an unknown but original source from which they drew, as well as drawing from each other in various ways.
Right.
So the Q source, or the Q document, is a hypothetical written collection of primarily the sayings of Jesus. Now, these are known as the logia, or to put the accent in the right place, the logia, but we'll keep it as logia. So the idea is that these oral sermons that Christ gave, they were preserved orally, they were written down in the Q document, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke in various ways borrowed from that Q document when they wrote their own Gospels. And it is also the core element of what's called the two-source hypothesis, the most widely accepted scholarly solution to the synoptic problem. So the hypothesis has 2 points, Jeff. The two-source hypothesis, can you take us through that?
Yes. So this hypothesis suggests that, one, the Gospel of Mark was written first. So this is what I found is and most of the varying theories that are out there,
right,
and even kind of some of these offshoots of the two-source theory, most of them seem to settle on the fact that Mark is the first of the three, right?
So the notion of Markan priority,
yes,
widely accepted by all scholars, and I think the reason is that Mark's storytelling is very, very simple. His style is simple. The gospel is shorter. It contains no infancy narrative, as do Matthew and Luke. And there are many other reasons, but that's the first element in the two-source hypothesis. What is the second?
And the second is that the authors of Matthew and Luke independently used two main sources.
Okay.
They used Mark's gospel itself for the narrative framework and the shared stories. And then they also used this hypothetical Q source for the sayings and material they share with each other, which is not found in Mark. So as I was reading earlier today, so there's 235 verses that Matthew and Luke share that are not in Mark.
Right.
So the idea is, where did those come from and why are they sharing them?
Yep.
It must be this lost source.
Right. But anywhere that the structure, the format, or even some of the words are either identical or nearly so, this is explained by Matthew and Luke's reliance upon Mark.
Yes.
So you have to combine these two elements, Markan priority to review, and Matthew and Luke's reliance upon this Q source.
Yes.
So where can one go, Jeff? What library, what university collection can one go to handle and read the Q document?
You can't, because it does not exist.
Wait a minute.
No, it is a purely kind of scholarly hypothetical document.
Right.
Kind of reminds me of it's like Proto-Indo-European.
Yes.
Right? It's which is a theoretical language from which other languages have all descended.
Yes. Yep. How much PIE do you use when you're teaching Latin and Greek? Do you,
pie?
Yeah, use that sometimes?
I eat a lot of pie.
No. Oftentimes when I'm talking about Greek and Latin, I will show the little tree diagram and I'll say, why does ho pater, Greek father, and Latin pater, why are they so similar? It's because of PIE, P-I-E, Proto-Indo-European.
I see. Oh, yes, exactly.
So the idea is very similar to this. How do you explain remarkable similarity? You hypothesize an source, right?
Yes.
An original fount from which the other two descended.
Right. I would add to this, my sense is also that is, maybe it's not a major pillar of the two-source theory, but this idea that Matthew and Luke using Mark being more educated or writing for a more educated audience, they quote unquote improve upon Mark, and maybe they use Q to kind of flesh out his document with a different audience in mind.
Okay, well, let's jump right in then, and I'm going to look at page 22 of the introduction. So that's Roman numeral 22, and I'd like to read an opening quote here, which I think sets the stage for much of the book. Wenham says, "The thesis of this book constitutes a radical departure from the commonly held view of the dates of the Synoptic Gospels. In spite of a few notable exceptions, there is wide agreement among New Testament scholars that no gospel should be put earlier than the late 60s. Wenham continues, usually Mark is placed first at plus or minus 70 AD, and Matthew and Luke somewhat later. This book will argue that all three are probably to be dated before 55.
That is a radical thesis.
That's right.
Yep. What else does he got there in the introduction that might set up this this thesis?
Right. So on the very next page, Wenham says, a new approach to the synoptic problem is attempted, which denies literary dependence as the primary explanation of the likenesses of the Gospels, and which also questions complete literary independence. So to kind of thread that needle, we're going to have to get into redaction criticism, right? So that comes quite a bit later in the book. But the notion is when Matthew or Luke look like Mark, it's because they have the scroll of Mark before them.
Yes.
And they are selecting or excerpting, but they're making their own choices along the way.
Right.
So Wenham says his approach will deny literary dependence as the primary explanation, and it will also question complete literary independence. So he's going to try to split the difference as the book develops. He says Matthew and Luke were not copying from Mark's scroll. What they were doing was adopting Mark's basic structure, but then giving their own material, not quotations.
Right. Now, let me ask you something and see if this rings true
Yes.
to you. So, do you think it would be fair to say that Wenham might say, well, I reject the idea of a physical document called Q out
Right.
there, but rather thinking of the oral traditions, which would have been written down theoretically in something like Q, they're out there, and Matthew and Luke are making use of those.
Well, if I understand his argument, and I have read the whole book, but I mean, it's there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Right? He's not saying that Matthew and Luke were relying on written sources other than Mark. So they used Mark for structure, but then the similarities, for example, in the Sermon on the Mount, or the Great Sermon on the Plain, as he says with respect to Luke, are explained by an oral transmission of things Jesus actually said.
Yes.
What makes that really remarkable is that they are so similar.
Right.
The similarity is explained by a common memory as arises from an oral culture.
Right. Now, this is really interesting because I think about this a lot when I teach Homer and try to explain to my students how something like Homer could survive in an oral fashion long before it was ever written down, and how the written version could ever reflect what was originally said. And I try to emphasize that, or I try to theorize for my students that in a pre-literate culture, and even in the literate culture such as the first century, that the expectations and the powers of memory must have been so much more potent than we can even possibly imagine.
Sure.
Right. So I think like this theory, that the kind of scholarly theory about Q, kind of dismisses that out of hand or doesn't even consider it.
Right.
And so the idea is that Matthew and Luke must have had a written version.
Right.
And they're so similar that cannot be explained by an oral tradition.
That's very well said.
Yeah.
The problem, though, that hypothesis introduces, as Wenham will teach us, is that both Matthew and Luke, if they were copying Mark, they were either very poor copyists, right?
Yeah.
Or they made some absurd choices. Why change this little detail? It doesn't seem to alter the meaning of what you're saying, right? So if you're quoting from Homer, and then at one point you decide to say, not that he struck him in the breastplate when Achilles, threw at Hector, but he struck him in the helmet.
Yeah.
Well, if he's copying, that has to be explained somehow.
Right.
Why change it?
Right.
But if they are remembering independently the same event, then there might be a reason for it.
Yeah.
Right? He struck him in the chest plate and then it bounced and hit his helmet. Or maybe it's telling, a general afternoon of fighting, but there was more than one spear thrust.
Right.
The copyist hypothesis can't account for these odd changes.
Right.
But we'll let Wenham make the argument, because he does it much better than I do. If I could continue just a little bit here from page 23 of the introduction. Quote, "The later evangelists are seen as probably writing with knowledge of the earlier Gospels, adopting the newly invented genre, and in the main following the same order, but they are not seen as systematically altering their predecessors' work. The difficulty of following and adapting scrolls, which did not even have word separation, is stressed."
Yeah.
So that's the point that you were referring to, right? Is the idea that, Luke unrolled all of Mark and then poured through it and found, okay, here, I'm going to quote this part, but I'm going to reverse the word order for no apparent reason in a couple of instances.
And then leave out this chunk and then jump in over here, right? Yeah,
and
it is strange.
Yeah, and finally Wenham says, what they write is fundamentally what they themselves are accustomed to teach. So it is a case of some degree of structural dependence and a high degree of verbal independence. So we want to stress that. Why do the three look the same? There's some structural dependence, and there's a high degree of verbal independence.
Right. Now, maybe for the benefit of our audience, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but Wenham, we should make it clear, rejects Mark as being the primary book, right? He says the traditional order of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that's the better way to look at the chronology of this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this book is brilliant. So those, in my opinion, who are serious students of the Gospels, they should get this book and read it, because it has, on page 25 of the introduction, a chronological table, right? Beginning with crucifixion, resurrection, ascension, Pentecost, 30 AD, going through the Gospel of Matthew, when it was written, the Gospel of Mark, then the Gospel of Luke. Paul's letters are put in a supposed, chronological sequence, all very well argued. Now, he may not be right about everything,
right?
But there's something really valuable about taking all of this material seriously and trying to, make good sense of it.
Yeah. Now, another monkey wrench to this whole thing, that kind of an argument I find interesting is, and on the surface of it, quite persuasive, the argument that the Gospels are much later, like the traditional scholarly view, is that they are not referred to in Paul's letters. There's no reference to that. Paul doesn't quote from the quote-unquote Gospels.
Yeah, but he does, according to Wenham. He doesn't quote from the Gospel, but there is a reference in one of his letters to the Corinthians to someone who was probably Luke. This is Wenham's argument, and it was a patristic argument, who is famous throughout the churches in the Gospel.
Right.
So he takes that as a reference to the Gospel of Luke.
So that's the 2 Corinthians 8:18.
Yes,
right?
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, that pops up.
I couldn't remember.
That pops up a lot. But I think back to kind of the traditional argument is that if these were written circulating documents, why wouldn't Paul be like? So that made a reference to Luke, but why isn't he quoting from?
Maybe he didn't have copies of them, and that's not how he traditionally taught.
Right.
That wasn't his standard mode of teaching.
Right. Yeah. I'm laying out that.
Yeah.
I think that's. I think that's a legitimate argument on the face of it.
It's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much of an argument it constitutes because I haven't looked at it in that way necessarily.
Yeah.
So what we're going to deal with today, now that we've kind of got started a little bit, is we're going to try to deal with the first 4 chapters. So these are Chapter 1, The Intractable Problem. Chapter 2, Building a Synoptic Theory. So chapters 2, 3, and 4 are Building a Synoptic Theory, Part 1, The Relation of Luke to Mark. Chapter 3, Building a Synoptic Theory, Part 2, The Relation of Luke to Matthew. Building a Synoptic Theory, Part 3, The Relation of Matthew to Mark. So Luke to Mark, Luke to Matthew, Matthew to Mark. Then from chapter 5 to the end, he deals with the patristic testimony, the date of Peter's going to Rome, Mark's gospel, ancient testimony to Luke's gospel, and then finally, how were the gospels written and when were they written in the final chapters.
Yeah, excellent. All right, Dave, before we dive right in, I want to try to anticipate a question maybe our audience might have is like, well, at the end of the day, like, well, who really cares? Like, who's first, who's second, who's third? Like, why does this kind of thing matter?
Okay.
And my sense is that in terms of theology, if the argument goes that these gospels are much later, from the 70s or 80s, the idea is that the theology then that they develop is more of a reflective one that's been kind of manipulated and massaged in the decades after the life of Jesus, rather than something that's coming directly after the death and resurrection of Jesus. So therefore, the secular argument that this is much more of a invention or kind of a political process, rather than that something that these ideas were there from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So that, I think that's where the dating and who comes first and who's relying on whom are theologically incredibly important, and not just a kind of a record book kind of a arrangement.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That's very well said. I think you put your finger on it. Absolutely.
But let's get back into Wenham.
Right, so at the end of Chapter 1, The Intractable Problem, I want to mention just a few things that Wenham says. So throughout this chapter, he's looking at the various competing theories before he sets out his own.
Yeah.
These are theories of varying degrees of dependence and independence. So he mentions J.M. Rist, Reike, Scott, Chilton, and so forth. But I want to deal particularly with the argument he presents from J.W. Scott.
Okay.
Right. So Scott got his PhD at St. Andrews University in 1986, and he wrote a dissertation not published, at least at this time, called Luke's Preface and the Synoptic Problem. So what he says is, what Scott says, and Wenham is interacting with this, Scott says he considers it to be almost certain that Luke is saying in his preface that his work is based virtually if not completely, on oral traditions alone.
Okay.
So the very famous preface, right, in the beginning of Luke, he says, inasmuch as others, dear Theophilus, right, have sat down to put together this history, I thought that I should do so as well. It's very similar to the Herodotean preface. It's standard Greek historiography. So maybe you can read that, Jeff, to set up this portion, please. Just maybe the first 4 verses of Luke 1.
Yes, and this is from the New International Translation. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught.
Very nice. So that handed down business is the Greek verb pareidoson, paradidomi, to hand over, to hand down. It's the basis of the English word, not the English word, but it is often translated into English as tradition. It's related to that word, traditio.
Yeah.
So Wenham is saying, J.W. Scott wrote this thesis, and he says that Luke in his preface is saying his work is based virtually, if not completely, on oral traditions alone.
Yeah.
So that's how Scott reads that preface. Now, Wenham takes issue with that, and that will wrap up chapter 1, and we'll go on to chapter 2 in a second. He says, quote, this is page 8, Scott's theory, though stated with great care, to me at least is not convincing. It posits an officially authorized oral gospel, which had a well-established order which, however, was not immune from change. This seems to me to be much like trying to have one's cake and eat it too. So says Wenham, there are 3 reasons for questioning complete independence. So remember that what Wenham is trying to do, he's trying to say there's literary independence, but structural dependence.
Right.
On Mark. So it is doubtful, point 1, it is doubtful whether the order of the pericopes in the 3 Gospels can be satisfactorily explained without recognition of literary connections. So in other words, the order in which the individual paragraphs of the story of the life of Jesus and his many wise sayings and sermons, these could not have happened independently by some kind of chance. This is what Wenham is saying.
Okay. Yep.
There would, of course, be no difficulty about putting the outstanding events in their natural order, the birth and baptism at the beginning, and the death and resurrection at the end. And there would be no difficulty about retaining a standard sequence of events which followed one another in quick succession, as in Holy Week. But, says Wenham, in the Galilean ministry, with its great number of events and its wealth of teaching, often with no obvious logical or chronological sequence, it is difficult to think that the correspondence of order would have arisen without a literary connection in a highly literate society, as was first century Judaism.
Okay, all right.
So that's the first point.
Yep.
In his refutation of Scott's thesis, that Luke is saying, this is just an oral tradition.
Yeah.
I didn't see any written documents.
Right.
The second point, there was great mobility in both secular society and among the churches. This is page 10. As is witnessed not only by Acts, but in the constant comings and goings to which the epistles bear witness. So this goes to your point, Jeff. Paul, having never set foot in Rome, knew at least 29 members of that church when he wrote to them in 58. The canonical Gospels, especially Matthew and Luke, were major works written by leaders of great competence, and it is unlikely that knowledge of their projected books was kept secret. So Luke was the companion of Paul, in other words.
Yep.
And so the suggestion is that he was working on it at some time during his association with Paul.
Right.
Rather, we would expect, says Wenham, one evangelist to be glad of another's help while preparing his own work. Therefore, complete independence suggests a sudden, almost simultaneous inspiration of 3 men and a speedy execution of the task by all of them. And they must all have found in their common oral tradition something sufficiently like the gospel genre to enable them thus independently to write in that genre. It seems a little improbable, says Wenham.
Yes. So, I mean, I think he's speaking to that kind of that idea of how embedded an oral tradition could become, that people could independently end up writing down the more or less the same thing.
Right.
Right. And like I think, yes, to the modern mind, the contemporary mind, that does seem extremely improbable.
Right.
But I don't think you necessarily, given what I understand of oral tradition, that means therefore you have to ascribe it to something divine.
Yes.
I think Wenham, from his background, would be. I think that's what he believes.
Absolutely.
Right. But I don't think that's from even a scholarly point of view. I don't think that's absolutely necessary. I don't know.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it, as you like to say,
Yes.
as we go through it. The third point in refutation of Scott, this is also page 10. There are traditions of gospel order in the early church, which most naturally presupposes that they were not all published at the same time. Rather, one evangelist invented the gospel genre, and others copied him. This notion that the later evangelists knew the work of the earlier ones was held by Augustine and may have been general. In due course, says Wenham, we shall try to demonstrate life settings for the Gospels which are separate both in space and time. In other words, Matthew was written here, and Mark was written here at this time, and Luke at a different time and place.
Right.
So then to summarize chapter 1, it seems then, says Wenham, that solely literary theories reach an impasse and that a simple oral theory is not adequate. So those are the extremes.
Yes.
Right? Slavish copying or complete reliance on oral testimony.
Yep.
He says there is a third possibility. There may be a large measure of independence as well as an important measure of interdependence. It is along these lines that a new attempt may be made to solve the synoptic problem.
Okay.
Now, before we segue into the ads, Jeff,
Yes.
can you get us started on chapter 2?
Yeah, so chapter 2, this is part 1 of his building a synoptic theory, the relation of Luke to Mark.
Okay.
So in this chapter, Wenham establishes that Luke knew and used Mark's gospel as a narrative framework. Wenham argues particularly in the chapters 4 through 9, the Galilean section, and 18 to 20 in the Perean section of Luke. And so he analyzes these various parallels, and he shows that Luke's fidelity to Mark's sense of order, particularly the calling of Levi, the withered fig tree, that despite verbal differences, suggesting a translation from a Semitic original. That's really interesting. That Matthew originally wrote in Aramaic or something.
Well, yes, we have to look at that evidence eventually too, which I find persuasive.
Yeah, so suggesting a translation from a Semitic original or independent rendering from oral tradition. He identifies 52 pericopes with common origin and 14 covering similar ground without direct dependence.
Yes. So a pericope, for those who might be new to the study of this material, is not that thing that you use when you're in a submarine to be able to look in a big circle, right?
Right.
That's called a periscope,
Yes.
right? But a pericope is a little portion that's cut around. So it's from, I think, a kopto to cut and then peri. So it's a paragraph, a little self-contained unit.
Yes.
And if you look at any translation of the Bible, you'll see the Gospels are divided up into these pericopes. And sometimes they're a little bit artificial. We don't have any sense that the authors of the Gospels had that in mind, but it's kind of a natural break.
Yes, indeed.
So 52 pericopes of Luke and Mark have a common origin, but 14 others cover the same ground, but they show no signs of common origin.
Of direct dependence, yes, exactly.
So how could that be? What explains very similar material, but no signs of common origin?
Yeah.
So step 3, Luke keeps to the sense of Mark in the truly parallel passages. So that suggests either literary dependence or dependence on an oral tradition, because how else do you explain Luke looking so much like Mark in those passages?
Yes. So let's look at some examples of these very things.
Right, these passages of common origin. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'd like to read from Mark chapter 10. I'll read a little bit of Greek here, if that's okay. So this is Mark 10, verse 21, and then you can read the translation of 21 and 22, please. So Mark writes, Hoda Jesus emblepsas auto egepasen auton kai epen auto, hen se hustere, hupage hosa eches polesan kai dos tois ptokois, kai hexes thesauron en urano kai delro akaluthe moi.
Well done.
Thank you.
And so this is what Jesus talking to the rich young ruler, right?
That's right.
So Jesus looked at him and loved him. One thing you lack, he said. Go sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. At this, the man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth.
Okay, so that's Mark 10, 21 and 22. Now we'll look at the parallel passage, one of these 52 pericopes. That's Luke 18, 22 and 23.
All right, Dave, so read some Greek, and I'll give you the translation.
Great. So this is Luke 18, 22. Akouses deha Jesus pen auto, eti hen soi lepe, panta hosa eches polesan kai diadas ptokois, kai hexes thesaurdran and tois uranois kai delro akaluthe moi. So that's just verse 22. And the translation?
When Jesus heard this, he said to him, you still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then
Right.
come, follow me.
Excellent.
Yep.
So that and verse 23, these are parallel passages. And as Wenham says, quote, the meaning is very close, but there are more than a score of differences in 2 verses. So the meaning is very similar, but there are more than 20 differences. I noticed them just going through there. So Jesus says, kai delro akaluthe moi, and then follow me. That is identical in Mark 10:21 and Luke 18:22. But the rest of the Greek is quite different. So Jesus in Mark 10 says emblepsos, it's a participle. And in Luke 18, it's akousos, when Jesus heard, not that he looked at him. And there are many other differences as well.
Interesting.
So what explains this?
Right.
That's the question.
Yep. Well, Dave, speaking of pericopes with common origins,
Yes.
it's time for the ads.
Let's do it. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by the good folks at Ratio Coffee. Jeff, did you have some coffee today?
Of course I did.
From the Bagel Bean and Barnery?
No, I did not even leave my own house.
The comfort of your own kitchen.
Yes, I brewed up another excellent brew in my Ratio 8.
Yes.
Delivers the perfect cup of coffee every single morning.
Metallic veins.
Yep, you got it.
Fibonacci.
Of course.
No brackish tang.
Not at all.
Scorch pad.
No, of course not.
Kindle brick.
No, none of that.
Other catchphrases.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So you had a good cup of coffee.
Of course. It was wonderful. Yep.
And then you got to the office and you brewed up before?
I did.
Nice.
Yes, exactly. Way too much caffeine that I need, but I mean, I can't resist it. And
No.
it's so easy.
The pour over is the way to go, I have to say.
It is.
Especially when it's automated.
Yes, exactly.
One touch, you go from bloom
to brew
to ready.
and that's it. Yep.
So let's say that our listeners, they want to do 2 things. They
Yep.
want to improve their coffee game,
Yes.
their morning ritual, and they want to support the Humble Podcast.
Yeah.
What ought they do, Jeff?
They should go to ratiocoffee.com/ad nauseum, right? Don't forget that V in ad nauseum.
Okay.
Yep. And they should find the machine that they want. You can get the 4 for your desktop in your office. It'd be perfect. You can get the middle brother, the 6.
Yeah.
Or if you want to go with the big daddy, the number 8, which is what I have on my counter.
The flagship.
The flagship. Any of those, go to ratiocoffee.com/ad nauseum. And Dave, what coupon code should they enter?
AN Ratio 2025.
Yes.
ANRATIO 2025. Maybe we'll make that coupon shorter next time.
Yeah.
Maybe just like one symbol, I don't know, semicolon.
That'd be nice.
AN Ratio 2025 to get $20 off any machine. You don't want to miss this.
Check it out. Listeners, are you ready for art that truly speaks to your story? Well, meet Della, a Tucson-based oil painter who captures the people, places, and moments you cherish with breathtaking detail. She has showcased her work in multiple galleries, illustrated books, and is often commissioned for standout projects. You can see her current works for sale at her website, dellachelpka.art. That's DELLACHELPKA.art. To find your inspiration, visit that website, and if you use this coupon code, Dave,
Apelles.
Yes.
APELLES.
and remind our listeners who that guy is.
Apelles was the most famous painter of antiquity. He's a Greek man, painted beautifully. If you use Apelles, you'll get a special ad nauseum discount of 10% off. And last but certainly not least,
Nope.
this episode is brought to you by the good folks of Hackett Publishing. Who is Hackett and what are they doing?
This is a company that has been around for 54, almost 55 years now.
As of tomorrow,
As of tomorrow,
right?
that's right.
Well, not actually tomorrow, but tomorrow is momentous, Winkle. It's
It
your
is.
birthday.
It is my birthday.
Yeah,
right.
also
Yeah.
the birthday of St. Augustine.
Yes, exactly right.
So you have some good company there.
Absolutely.
But back to Hackett.
Hackett Publishing, they've been around for 55 years now, bringing the classics
Right.
to a wide audience in attractive, affordable, erudite packages.
That's right.
They've got their offices in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Indianapolis, Indiana, and they've been with us from the very beginning.
That's right.
We love these guys.
We do, absolutely. If you want to build your library, and who wouldn't want to build a good classical library? Of
course.
They are the folks to go to. Browse their fabulous website. Check out the new Aristotle series. We're still intending to give some of those away. There may have been a little bit of a hiccup, but the new complete works of Aristotle as edited by Reeve and others in a nice slipcase, Smith sewn, and I think there's a tote bag thrown in.
Fantastic.
But virtually anything that you'd want from this era, you can find on Hackett's website.
Yes, hackettpublishing.com.
And Jeff, what do they get once they have decided on some works to add to their collection?
Well, they drop in this coupon code,
Right.
AN2025. You'll get two amazing things. You'll get 20% off your entire order and also free shipping.
Check it out. All right, Jeff, so as we return to the theme here after the ads, we're still in Chapter 2. We need to wrap up just one little point before we turn to Chapter 3.
All right.
And that is what Wenham labels Category 2, passages that show no prima facie evidence of common origin.
Okay.
So remember, there were 52 pericopes that suggest between the two, that is, between Mark and Luke, common origin. Now there are 14 or so that don't show prima facie evidence.
All right.
And we want to look at Luke chapter 5 and compare it to Mark chapter 1. So Wenham says on page 29, in verses 1 through 3 of Luke 5, we have Jesus standing by the lake of Gennesaret, seeing two empty boats and fishermen nearby washing their nets. He gets into one of the boats and teaches the people from it. In verses 4 through 10, he tells Peter to put out into the deep. Peter, James, and John are awed by the catch of fish. Peter acknowledges his sinfulness and is told that he will catch men. In verse 11, they come to land, leave everything, and follow Jesus. Mark has no parallel to the main story, Peter's call after the great catch of fish. He has, however, an account of the call of Peter, James, and John, and also Andrew, which is remarkable for its completely different treatment. There are a few verbal coincidences. In verses 1 through 3, we have the Greek words para, Aden, halaes, and ta dictua. So this is the preposition para, the verb Aden, he saw, halaes, fishermen, and ta dictua, which means nets. Verses 4 through 9, however, are quite independent. In verses 10 and 11, the coincidences are underlined and differences can be clearly seen. So that's the end of Wenham. Now let's read a little bit of Greek and get the translation so that the listener can see it, so to speak, for themselves.
All right, read from Mark 1 in Greek.
Okay, so this is Mark 1, verse 17. Kai epen autois ha Jesus, delta opisomu, kai poieso humas genesthai halaes anthropon. And then, Jeff, can you read the translation?
Yes.
Down through verse 20, please.
Okay, sure. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. When he had gone a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him.
Okay, very good. Now we want to compare this to Luke 5, just verses 10 and 11. So I'm going to read verse 10 of Luke 5 in Greek, and then, Jeff, you'll get the translation for us.
Let's go.
All right. Hamoios de kai Jacoban kai Ioannein huius Zebedaiou, hoi esan koinonoi to Simoni, kai epen pros ton Simona ha Jesus, me fabu, apa tu nun anthropus esse zogron, kai karagagontes ta ploia epitengain, afentes panta ekoluthesan auto.
Excellent. I'm going to back my translation up just for a sense to verse 9. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him.
Excellent. So if you have a Greek New Testament listener and you like this kind of thing, you're going to want to look at Mark 1 and Luke 5. But as best we can, I'm going to describe it for you if you're listening. So we have these parallel phrases. In Mark 1:17, we have kai epen, and he said. This is repeated in the middle of Luke 5, verse 10, kai epen, and he said. Another similarity is that in verse 19 of Mark 1, it's Jacoban, James, Zebedaiou kai Ioannein, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. This occurs in Luke 5, verse 10, Jacoban kai Ioannein huius Zebedaiou. So similar, but not identical.
Right.
The other similarity is that in verse 20 of Mark 1, we have this participle aphentes, leaving behind or abandoning their father. The same word is in Luke 5:11, aphentes, but here it is leaving behind panta, everything. Not leaving behind his father, Zebedee, their father Zebedee, in the boat. So, similar story, a few verbal similarities,
Right.
but a great difference in the way that it is told.
Yes. Right. So, I mean, clearly does not seem to be two men copying from a written source in front of them.
Definitely not.
Right.
Other elements that Wenham covers in chapter 2, the institution of the Lord's Supper from Luke 22 as compared to Mark 14, the arrest of Christ, which is in Luke 22, and it is also in Mark 14, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
There's Barabbas and the condemnation, the way to the place of the crucifixion, all the Lucan story. So to summarize, right at the end of chapter 2, this is what Wenham says. And this is from page 38. In the 14 examples cited above, there seems to be no prima facie evidence that Luke has been adapting the text of Mark.
Right.
From Luke 22:14 right to the end of the gospel, the evangelist appears to have his own account of the passion and resurrection. It is possible that the wording of Mark may have influenced Luke's phraseology occasionally, but it seems to be a fundamental mistake to try to explain Luke as an adaptation of Mark in this section of the book and in the earlier cases examined. And he adds this on page 39. He says, the wording, order, and content are so different in the burial and the empty tomb accounts that Luke's redaction of Mark would perforce have been a tortuous process to have achieved this result. And in view of its likeness to the account in 1 Corinthians 11, it is better to regard it as a separate line of tradition followed perhaps in the Pauline churches. So this is with respect to the Lord's Supper. The institution of the Lord's Supper in the Gospel of Luke and in 1 Corinthians 11 is very, very close. And so Wenham says this is probably what was done in the churches that Paul established, and that explains the similarity because Luke was Paul's traveling companion, and it strongly suggests Luke did not rely upon Mark there at all.
Right. So interesting.
Yeah. So that's the end of chapter 2. Now, as we go into chapter 3, Jeff, what does it look like? What's the terrain like here?
Right. So this is the second part of his building a synoptic theory, the relation of Luke to Matthew. So in this, Wenham extends his analysis to Q material, shared non-Markan sayings, arguing against a written Q document.
Okay.
He demonstrates Luke's similar fidelity to the sense of Matthean parallels, so for example, the Beatitudes, the Lord's Prayer, with differences attributable to natural variations in oral transmission or recollection of Jesus' itinerant teaching.
Okay. Now, because, Jeff, this is pretty complicated material to cover on a podcast,
Yes.
right? Can you please remind us, what is the Q document again?
The Q document is this scholarly, theoretical document. It doesn't actually exist.
Okay.
The idea, this is a source material that the early gospel writers are reliant upon.
Specifically, Matthew and Luke, when they're not following Mark.
Yes.
So Mark in priority, according to the scholarly consensus that Wenham is combating.
Right.
Mark was first. When Matthew and Luke are not following Mark, so it's said, they're following this Q document.
Right. So Mark plus Q gives us Matthew and Luke to some degree.
All right. Sounds like algebra.
Yeah. No thanks.
So page 42, this is chapter 3. Wenham says, we can assume for the sake of argument, just for the sake of argument, the existence of a Q document and look at the possibilities. Possibility 1, the Q text was like the Matthean form, like Matthew. Possibility 2, it was like the Lucan form, or possibility 3, both the Matthean and the Lucan form are the result of considerable redactional change, so intermingling, copying, and part 4, the possibility that Luke extracted his material directly from Matthew. So remember at the beginning we were saying, quoting Jeb, that this is really complicated?
Yes.
Now you were getting a sense of it.
Right.
Right. If there is a Q document, how do we explain the ways that Matthew and Luke either follow it or don't follow it?
Right.
Depending on how you define it. So one possibility is to assume that Luke is the innovator. And, says Wenham, if Matthew keeps to the sense of this supposed document Q, it is easy to show that Luke frequently fails to do so. it will be found that in about half the material usually classified as Q, Luke would appear not to keep to the sense of his source. So let that sink in a minute, right? So the supposed Q document,
Yes.
scholars say, oh, here Luke is not following Mark, Luke is following Q. But in half of those instances, Luke does not appear to follow the same order as the supposed Q content from Matthew.
I see. So there's on the first surface of it, it appears there's shared material
Right.
in Matthew and Luke, and so
Right.
they posit, okay, this is from Q, but
Right.
they are arranging them differently?
Yeah, so if you and I, right, were to write a short history of this podcast, heaven forbid, right, and we had a Google Doc that, someone had put together, maybe Mishka or something, and this is a ridiculous analogy, but we'll just bear with it.
Run with it, yeah.
Right. And you and I wrote our own accounts, right? People would say, oh, well, Jeff is working from memory of what he experienced the last grueling 5 years, and Dave is working from memory also. But why is there so much similarity? Well, there must be a Q document.
Yes.
There's got to be some origin, some Google Doc that they were both drawing from.
Right.
But then as it turns out, Jeff, 50% of the time, you didn't follow the order that supposedly came from that document that I followed.
Yes.
Half the time.
Right. How
So
can that be?
How can that be?
Yeah.
So it appears in a few different sections, this kind of disparity. Wenham says, it will be well to look at Luke's Q material in 3 parts. The central section, that's part 1, which covers the bulk of the material. Part 2, the sermon on the level place, the sermon on the plain or the mount. And part 3, the rest of Luke, which is kind of your catch-all.
Yeah.
So then through the rest of chapter 3, he examines these to find out, what explains the difference and the similarity. He has the argument from order. He then has the argument from wording. And we don't really have time to go into that in too much detail.
Yeah.
But later in chapter 3, he explains redaction criticism.
Now, can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we mentioned this at the beginning of the episode in terms of what the copying would look like. So I'd like to quote here from Wenham because it's really very helpful. He says, before proceeding to the argument from wording, a serious question of methodology must be faced, which necessitates a digression.
Okay.
I like this guy.
Yeah.
We could if he hadn't gone on to glory, he could be on the podcast.
Right.
'Cause we love digressions, don't we?
Absolutely, all the time.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Okay, he says, redaction critics tend to see the redactionary process as something quite complex, so it may seem naive to try to assess the probability of a literary connection by simply laying parallel passages side by side and asking ourselves whether they look as though one is adapting the text of the other. It has been believed for so long that the synoptic problem must be solved in terms of literary relationships that likenesses between passages are explained almost exclusively in a literary way, however great the differences may be.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
why do they look similar? Oh, they were both copying from a common
From the
source.
same document.
And that's kind
Yeah.
of the only explanation that's entertained.
Yes.
But Wenham doesn't like it. He continues, it must be remembered, however, that the Gospels were produced in a society where much learning was acquired by rote,
Yes.
as you were saying.
Exactly.
And they were produced for communities who were trying to propagate the common teaching of the apostolic church. In such circumstances, verbal likenesses would survive in oral transmission, and there is no need to invoke literary sources unless there is consistent evidence of actual copying. Here's the payoff. Only if it is assumed that Luke had little knowledge not obtained from literary sources will it appear probable that all resemblances to Mark came directly from Mark, or that all Matthew-Luke resemblances came from Q. So that's really the nub of it, I would say.
Yes. Right. I'm drawn to his highlighting, kind of his reconsideration of the oral tradition.
Right.
Right. And so even the talk about this culture being comparatively literate.
Right.
Even so, the vast majority of people
That's right.
who learned these things and passed it on were likely illiterate.
That's right.
I mean, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all these guys were able to read and
Sure.
write. But in terms of the larger populace, those learning this, and surely many of the people in the early church who were learning these things and passing them on knew them only through the ear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so like the 28 people mentioned at the end of the book of Romans,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Where did they get their knowledge of the Gospels?
Exactly.
Yeah. So maybe it looks like we're not going to get to chapter 4.
Well, color me unsurprised.
Yeah.
Right?
But I'd like to read just a little bit here from page 87, which is the very end of chapter 3, right? The second part of building a synoptic theory, because I think it's a great summary. Is it okay if I read a little bit of that there?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so page 87. The picture which is emerging would suggest that Luke had 2 documents which are known to us, which he used quite differently, but equally scrupulously. He took Mark as his guide to the basic framework of the gospel, following the order and main substance of Mark's pericopes in the first third and final third of his book, though seldom following his actual wording. Matthew he seems to have used in a minor way to provide some supplementary information in the early part of the book. That he used so little of Matthew would not be surprising if Luke intended his gospel to supplement rather than to replace the earlier work, and if he was hard-pressed for space. In addition, Luke had a great quantity of new material, not only the commonly recognized L material, but a different account of the great sermon and of the healing of the centurion's boy, the whole central section, and the parable of the pounds. And Luke probably had his own version of the eschatological discourse and the passion narrative prior to his final composition of the gospel. This is tantamount to a great enlargement of the category known as Special Luke.
Special Luke.
You know, we don't want to add him to the host of characters. I
really want to.
I can see where you're going. Lazy Steve, Embryonic Mark, and
Special Luke,
Remote Ron, and Local Will. No.
All right.
No, this is material that is unique to Luke.
Right.
Because one of the traditions is that when Jesus sends out the 70, right, he sends out 70 disciples, that Luke was one of those because it is only recorded in the Gospel of Luke.
Right. And so all of this is part of, I mean, we'll get to in a future episode.
That's right.
About, talk more about Matthew, but this is kind of setting up Wenham's argument that the order in which the Gospels are traditionally presented are the order in which they were written. So Luke is reliant upon, to some degree, Mark and Luke and
Mark and Matthew.
Sorry, Mark and Matthew, and a lot of the new material is Special Luke.
That's correct.
That's right.
And the great similarity of, well, not the great, but the similarity of wording is because they were all remembering the really pointed sayings of Christ in an oral culture.
Yes.
I find it very persuasive.
I do so far. I can't wait to see where this goes.
Yep. So that will be for next week. But Jeff, before we get out of here, we have to do a few things, do we not?
Of course. As always, we have some people to thank.
Yes.
We have Mishka, our wonderful engineer.
Yes.
Who turns us around so quickly and makes us sound better than we actually are.
We've got Jeff Sheets, the shredder and disc dogger from Kansas City, Missouri, who gives us that great intro music, Thrill Seeker, the thrill of studying the classics.
Yes.
I say that every time.
Yeah.
Do you think anybody's persuaded?
I think they are.
Okay,
right?
great.
So, and I am guessing, listener, if you are tuning in,
right,
you might have an interest in learning some Greek or Latin. And if you do,
I want to thank. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jeff. I want to thank the other Jeff.
Yes.
For the outro and the bumper music.
Oh yes, of course.
Okay, but then go ahead.
Yes, and so if you are interested in learning some Greek or Latin, my friend Dave across the table here, he can help you. How can you help them, Dave?
I suggest you go to latinperdiem.com, and check out all of the courses I have. I have beginning courses in Greek and beginning courses in Latin. I have advanced master classes in Latin. If you want to read the New Testament with a new depth and comprehension, maybe you've been through seminary, but it's a little rusty and you're not confident, I really can help you. I can take you from neophyte to
erudite.
Yes, the last 30 years or so of my studying and teaching has been not crammed, but put comfortably into these Moss modules. And it's a great value, I think. I got a coupon code 10+, 10PLUS. Put that into your checkout place and get 10% off anything on the site.
Excellent. And hey, listener, if you want a shout out, if you want to be featured on the show like Reverend Coleman was at the top of this one, write to us. You can write to Dave at Ad Nauseam. Don't forget that V.
Or Jeff at Ad Nauseam. Don't forget the V. You can check out a Quai Nocent Docent t-shirt, What Hurts Teaches. You can get an Ad Nauseam hat and so on and so forth. Jeff, what are we doing next time? Number 202?
I think we're going to continue this wonderful discussion of this incredible book.
That's right. 202, Redating Matthew, Mark, and Luke, a fresh assault on the Synoptic Problem, Part 2.
Yes.
And I think that pretty much wraps it up, except for the GPS, the gustatory parting shot, which, Jeff, this week is yours.
Yes, this comes from a book which I would never dream of picking up.
No.
I'm judging this book by its title.
Oh, me too.
This is from one Elaine Seller from Your Multidimensional Workbook, Exercises for Energetic Awakening.
If I may,
yes.
There's a couple problems with this.
Yes.
I don't buy any book that says workbook. I don't want to work.
No.
You do the work.
Right,
Let me. And the second problem with
Yeah.
it is energetic awakening.
Oh, my.
I just kind of fall out of bed.
Exactly.
There's nothing
I'm a
energetic.
slothful awakening.
There you go.
That's right.
Okay.
But at any rate, Elaine writes this in her text. Our bodies need a range of frequencies to support good health.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know what this has to do with food exactly. What frequency is a carrot at? Like
Or a Snickers bar.
440 hertz, and then the Snickers is at what, 230?
Well, you need an adapter if you're eating that
I
overseas. At any rate, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.